Hola, Facebook. It's Beto here, your daily divinity coach, here for episode number 38 of my weekly series, Sunday Weekly Revival. I'm just going to go ahead and tag a few friends. So if you're watching the recorded video, go ahead and feel free to fast forward a few minutes while we get an audience going here for today's episode. So again, just fast forwarding a few friends. Not fast forwarding. I'm tagging a few friends, and then we'll get started soon for today's episode. So if you're watching the recorded video, again, feel free to go ahead and fast forward a few minutes while I tag some friends and see if we can get a nice audience going for today's episode. So just going through and again, tagging a few friends here, seeing if we can get a nice audience going, and then we'll get started soon. So just a few more friends, and then we'll get started. So looks like there's some people out there. I can go ahead and tag, and then we'll get started real soon here. All right, just a couple more people, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Perfect. All right, I think that's good. Let's see. All right, we got some people joining. Perfect. Excellent. All right, we got Paul. Paul, if you don't mind, like throwing some hearts or something up, likes in the air, so I know that my sound is working. Just want to do a quick sound check. That would be wonderful. If you're able, I know sometimes people are on the treadmill or running around the track when they're watching. So, oh, yeah, looks like we're good. Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. So, and now it looks like more people are joining. Awesome. So, again, I'm Beto. I'm your daily divinity coach, and I have an aunt, a tia, who always reminds me every day, or not every day, but the night before the show, she always calls me up and says, "Mijo, don't forget to give me my shout out." So shout out to my tia Emma Lou. She watches every episode, and she's caring for her partner who's been hospitalized. So prayers for him, and shout out for her. So if you're watching the recorded video, I'm just going to give a brief introduction. We just tagged a bunch of folks, so allow some more people to join. So if you're watching the recorded video, feel free to go ahead and fast forward a few minutes while I give my introduction. So I'm Beto. I'm your daily divinity coach, and we're here for episode number 38 of my weekly series, Sunday Weekly Revival. Episode number 38 is entitled Nelson Mandela, the All Blacks, and being ageless, liberated, and limitless. Today is Sunday, April 11th, 2021. Really excited to be here. Just a little bit about myself. So I was tutored by my mother in the law of attraction since the age of 10. And I know, some of you out there are probably thinking, well, my dad taught me how to play baseball from the age of 10, or how to play golf, or how to, be a boxer or whatever. I don't know. I was taught to be a spiritual warrior. And my mom right now, she's still my prayer partner. She's been, we do scientific prayer. So if you have a request, please send it over. You can IM me, DM me, text me. You can fill out an order form on my website, dailydivinitycoach.com. And my mom and I are happy to say a scientific prayer for you. But yeah, since the age of 10, been taught that. So, it's what I grew up with. I went to divinity school. My graduate studies focus was on liberation, theology, and social justice. So I talk about that in addition, to the law of attraction, scientific prayer. And then in addition to that, I had just a self-study, really just street smarts. I applied street smarts and did a 10-year self-study about immortality and manifesting, being ageless. And so I talk about that as well. Those are really the three topics. And at the end of the 10-year self-study, that's when I actually came on social media. And so every day during the week, I post about a paragraph on social media, here on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. And then on the weekends, I do my live shows. So on yesterday, we had our Saturday midday live. I do that in collaboration with my co-host, Dr. Michelle Yanez, who's been watching my shows for about 7 months. And she approached me with this idea of a live show on Saturdays in the middle of the day. And I said, yeah, let's do it. And it's been great. We've done it for 3 weeks, and there's been a tremendous outpouring of support. And then on Sundays, I'm here for the Sunday Weekly Revival. And Episode 38. So I've been around for a while, almost a year now, because on the first Sunday of the month, I do my monthly mailbag. So every Sunday I'm here. Almost every Sunday I'm doing Sunday Weekly Revival, with the exception of the first Sunday of the month. I do my monthly mailbag, which is you pre-submitting questions, and I use your questions as content for the show. Otherwise, Sunday Weekly Revival, I'm providing original content for these shows. So I think that's almost all for the introduction, with the exception of saying that I got new bracelets. These are my original bracelets: Manifest Abundance, Manifest Justice, Manifest Spirituality. But now I got, or not spirituality, immortality. But now I got these new bracelets. There's a beige one that says Ageless, a green one that says Liberated, and a red one that says Limitless. And they're awesome. People love them. I produced and ordered 500 sets, and we've already shipped out 150. So there's still 350 remaining. That's 150 sets in just 11 days. So if you haven't received your bracelets, please reach out. IM me, DM me, text me, or you can submit an order form, dailydivinitycoach.com. I just need an address and a name, and I can ship you out your set. And again, people seem to love them, and I'm really excited about that. Free! The bracelets are free, and the shipping's free, always in the U.S., until the end of June if you're in North America or Europe. Unfortunately, to ship to places like Brazil and India are just too cost prohibitive. I would love to. A lot of people, I got a lot of people who watch my shows from over there and read my posts, but it's just too cost prohibitive. But if you're in the U.S., you're lucky, so make sure you get yours, because there's plenty of people in India and Brazil wish they could have them. So let's get started with the content of the show. We got a lot of content to review. We're going to start the show by talking about the Dutch East India Company. And I know some of you might be thinking, the Dutch East India Company, what does that have to do with Nelson Mandela? It has a lot to do with Nelson Mandela. The Dutch East India Company, also known as by their acronym VOC, and that's Dutch for, that acronym is Dutch for the Dutch East India Company. They were established March 20th, 1602, so at the very beginning of the 1600s. And they were dissolved as a corporation at the very end of 1799, December 31st. So they're around for 200 years, all the 1600s, 1700s. They were there, the Dutch East India Company. All modern day corporations. So think about Apple, right? Apple Computer. Think about Amazon. Think about General Motors. Think about all these modern day corporations. Well, they are all actually descendants the VOC corporate model. The VOC was the first true transnational corporation. So what happened is in 1602, the Dutch government granted the Dutch East India Company, VOC, a monopoly, shut out the competition, a monopoly on the East India spice trade. So their roots are as a monopoly. But they weren't just into East India spices, although they both produced and traded in East Indian spices. They also built ships. They're into shipbuilding. They're into Indonesian coffee, sugar cane, South African wine. So they're a true conglomerate. They had a lot of things going on, a lot of revenue sources, a lot of things being produced and sold and traded. In 1602, VOC, Dutch East India Company, the same year that they were established, they actually undertook the world's first IPO, initial public offering. They went public. This is the first time. It's never been done. It's never done before, right? In the modern world or in the fourth world. And they raised a huge amount of money, a huge sum of money, 6.5 million guilders. And I know you're probably thinking, what are guilders? Well, that's not the U.S. dollar, right? In other countries, they have other currency. In Holland, they had their own currency. But 6.5 million guilders was a huge amount of money. So they're the first, company, transnational corporation, true transnational corporation. And they had a monopoly. Granted by the Dutch government, first company go public. And they also established the first stock market there in Amsterdam, in Holland. And then they're the first formally listed public company. And they really were an empire. I mean, they were the symbol of the Dutch Empire globally around the world. In foreign colonies, they had unbelievable powers. They could wage war. A corporation, can you imagine Apple or Amazon waging war? GM, right? they waged war. They also had the powers to imprison and kill convicts. They can negotiate treaties. Again, they're basically an empire. Or they were an empire, what am I saying? And they could also make their own coins, currency, money. They had these powers like an empire. And they are also, the Dutch East India Company, VOC, was heavily involved in the slave trade. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning, Apple, GM, all these corporations, Amazon, they're descendants of this. They're descendants of a corporation that not only, established the stock market and went IPO and all this stuff, but it was also granted a monopoly, not necessarily a good word, right, in business, and also was heavily involved in the slave trade. Again, not a good thing at all, right? A bad thing, an evil thing. But that's the roots of corporations globally. So anyway, and going back to the slave trade, and in Indonesia, they would enslave entire populations, right, to work the agriculture for them, entire populations. And then, so now we want to get here, right? We want to get to Nelson Mandela. So let's talk about South Africa. So the Dutch East India Company ends up colonizing what they called, in South Africa, what they called the Cape Colony. So they're down there in South Africa, the Cape of South Africa, the Cape Colony. And in March 28th of 1658, they started importing slaves to South Africa. And the first slaves came from Angola, right? From Angola, South Africa to South Africa. And they brought in slaves from Ghana and other places in Africa to come to the Cape Colony in South Africa. And these slaves were put to work doing agricultural work. They would work the fields, the wheat fields, wine, right? Wine was a big export into Europe. So this is what the slaves were brought in to do. So we're going to fast forward 5 decades to 1710. In 1710, the adult slave population now outnumbered the European colonial population 3-1. So for every 3 slaves there in South Africa, there's only 1 European colonizer. So the white colonizers are the minority. And those numbers become, that gap becomes bigger as time moves on. So now we're going to fast forward a few centuries, and we're going to go to 1948, post-World War II South Africa, 1948. South Africa had actually been involved in World War II, helping defeat Nazi Germany. But within South Africa, there was opposition to South African involvement in the war against Nazi Germany. So if you've heard me speak back in the day, when Trump was in power here in the U.S., and you had all these anti-Antifa people, right? And I would say, anti, 2 negatives equal a positive, right? That's basic mathematics. So if you're anti-fascism, then what does that make you? It makes you a fascist, and that's what these people were. They were against South Africa's involvement, fighting the fascists, right? So if you're anti-fascist, you're a fascist, and that's what they were. But they were also organized, and they had their own party. It was called the National Party, and they rose. They rose to power in the 1948 elections. They won. They became the seated power, the seated party in South Africa, the National Party. And they had their own their own philosophy, and it was Afrikaner nationalism. The Afrikaans, they were descendants of, and this is why I started with the Dutch East India Company. They were descendants of those colonizers that came during that time, the Dutch East India Company, the empire that was settled there in Cape Colony. The Afrikaners saw themselves, and they were descendants of those folk that originally came to do what? To enslave and become prosperous through enslaving folk and having them work their farms and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, the Afrikaans have their own language. 90 to 95% of the vocabulary of the Afrikaans language is actually comes from the Dutch language, or is of Dutch origin. So it's really a Dutch daughter language, but they have their own language. And so what did the National Party do when they came into power? Well, they implemented what they called apartheid. Apartheid comes from the Afrikaans, a word for apartness, right? Separation, segregation, what we'd call in the U.S. segregation. So they came to power and they implemented apartheid. And it's pretty phenomenal to think about that a minority population could implement that against a majority population, because during that time of apartheid in South Africa, the white population was estimated at only about 13 to a high of maybe 20, 21, 22% of the population. The overwhelming majority of the population was not white. But nonetheless, they're able to enforce this system of institutionalized racial segregation, even though they were the minority. So now enter Nelson Mandela. So Nelson Mandela was born 1918 to 2013. He was of indigenous African origin. He's also known as Madiba. Madiba is a title of respect from his indigenous clan. Mandela was a lawyer by trade. Nelson Mandela was a lawyer by trade. And he had joined the African National Congress. So he became politicized. So not only was he a lawyer, but he was also politicized. He joined the African National Congress in 1943 at 25 years of age. And again, this was just before the National Party came to rise. And in 1944, so the year after he joined, he co-founded the Youth League of the African National Congress. So he becomes a leader, right, within the African National Congress. At that time, before apartheid, the African National Congress mission was really one of unity, to bring all Africans together and to get the voting rights, right? Because black South Africans were denied vote, and mixed race South Africans were denied the right to vote. So it was about the right to vote for the African National Congress. But then in 1948, when the National Party comes to power, now the ANC's focus shifts. They still want the right to vote for black South Africans and mixed South Africans, but it really becomes focused, their mission really becomes focused on ending apartheid, right? Ending apartheid, ending segregation, the systemic segregation, because segregation was always around there in South Africa, but the systemic, legal segregation that was taking place under the apartheid regime. So initially, the ANC wanted to do this and went about doing it through nonviolent means. So really like that Gandhi, Dr. Martin Luther King approach, right? We're going to protest, we're going to do this peacefully through nonviolent means. But it wasn't working. Matter of fact, in March of 1960, so National Party's already been around 12 years now, there was the Sharpeville massacre. And what took place is that 7,000 peaceful, right, unarmed protesters were protesting. They descended upon a police station. They were protesting, and they were shot upon by the police. Peaceful protesters, unarmed, were shot upon by the police. 69 were killed, and over 180 more injured or wounded. It was a massacre. It was traumatic. It was unspeakable that this happened. But then the apartheid regime doubled down, and 18 days later, on April 8, 1960, they banned the ANC in South Africa, the African National Congress, right? Nelson Mandela's organization was banned in South Africa. So what does the ANC do? What does Nelson Mandela do? So after the ban, Nelson Mandela actually co-founded a wing of the ANC, and I have trouble pronouncing it, so I'm going to say it in English. It was named Spirit of the Nation. And this wing was going to fight apartheid as a militant thing, right, versus a peaceful, nonviolent thing. And so they would use guerrilla warfare, sabotage, right? They were getting military training outside of South Africa. So they decided it was time to fight violence with guerrilla warfare and sabotage. But they were up against the South African army, right? Again, white South Africans were the minority, but they had a mighty army. At their height, they had over 100,000 troops. The South African Army, at its peak in the 80s, they were spending 4.4% of their GDP on the army. I mean, they were mighty. So the ANC was up against it, right? Even though they had the numbers, they didn't have that army. So anyhow, what happened was that Mandela ends up getting arrested. He was arrested, imprisoned, tried, and sentenced to life imprisonment for conspiring to overthrow the state. So he ends up in prison. And he ended up serving 27 years in prison. The first 18, right, 2/3 of his time in prison, the first 18 of those 27 years, he was imprisoned at the brutal, inhumane Robben Island prison. He was confined to a small cell, no bed, no plumbing, and he was forced to do hard labor in the hot sun in the quarry breaking stone. That was his life. So then what happened? What was going on outside of South Africa? Well, there was Oliver Tambo, who was actually the president of the ANC, the African National Congress. He left South Africa, and he was living in exile at this time in London, in the United Kingdom. And that ended up becoming the base of the anti-apartheid movement. So South Africa, right, the regime is still there, and they're oppressing, repressing. Oliver Tambo is able to, leave and go into exile in London, in England, and starts the anti-apartheid movement. That really becomes the base of the anti-apartheid movement out there in Europe. So one of the things that happened in 1965, so Mandela's only been in prison for a couple years, they organized the academic boycott of South Africa. Almost 496 university professors and lecturers representing 34 British universities had an academic boycott of South Africa. In 1973, the United Nations passed a resolution labeling apartheid as a crime against humanity. And in 1974, South Africa was suspended from the General Assembly of the United Nations. So things are happening, right? I mean, it's been a while. Mandela's been in prison for over a decade now, but things are starting to happen. Nonetheless, United States, right, now the empire, right, because of the world. I mean, you still got the Cold War, you still got Russia, but U.S. is really the empire. Ronald Reagan's the president at the time. It's the 1980s, and he's labeling and calling Mandela a terrorist. Right? He's accusing the ANC of being a terrorist organization, and his partner over there in the UK, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, is doing the same thing. She's calling Nelson Mandela a terrorist, and the UNC a terrorist organization. So although you got so now you got like two camps, right? Those who want to end apartheid, want that to go away, and then you got the Reagans and the Thatchers who are saying no, the ANC, Mandela, they're terrorists. So you got these camps, and it's in the 80s it's kind of even, but then something happens, and what happens? Well, pop culture happens, and pop culture ends up making Nelson Mandela. There's other things that go on, but it's really pop culture that tips the scales and makes Mandela the most famous political prisoner in the world. The first thing that happened was there was a band very popular when I was in high school called there's a UK ska band out of the UK called originally the Specials, but then the AKA Specials, or Special AKA. And they released a song. The song was written by Jerry Dammers. It was produced by Elvis Costello. And the band, the Special AKA, released it. It was released in March 5th of 1984. And it was called Free Nelson Mandela. And it was an upbeat song. And it became hugely popular in the UK. It was peaked at number 9 on the UK singles chart, and hugely popular in South Africa. And I remember I was a freshman in high school, and I grew up in San Francisco, and if you were cool back then, you dressed cool and you acted cool and you looked cool, you can get into the nightclubs. And so we'd go to the nightclubs, me and my friends who watch the shows, Carlos and Rich and Victor and Caesar and Pablo and all my friends at that time, we'd go to the clubs, Kenny, and we danced to this song, Free Nelson Mandela. So I became politicized. I became aware of who Nelson Mandela was as a high school freshman. And I'm just going to recite a few of the verses here. I'm not going to sing them for it, but I will recite them. So 21 years in captivity. So in 1984, Mandela had been in captivity in prison for 21 years. Shoes too small to fit his feet. Remember, the brutal, inhumane prison system there in Robben Island. His body abused. He took a lot of abuse from the prison guards, but his mind still free. Mandela, he still had it, right? He still had that mind. You're so blind, right now they're talking to those who are labeling him a terrorist. They're coming down on Mandela, right? You're so blind you cannot see. Free Nelson Mandela. That's the name of the song, Free Nelson Mandela. So again, became hugely popular, and that was in 1984. And then 4 years later, in 1988, a genius concert promoter decided to do an anti-apartheid concert there in the UK. And it was he made it a celebration of Nelson Mandela's 70th birthday. So Nelson Mandela had been in prison a long, long time now, right? And this concert promoter got top acts of that era. Got Dire Straits, got Whitney Houston, got Sting, remember Sting of the Police, to play in this concert. Also got all these networks around the world to broadcast the concert. And it ended up being watched by 600 million, approximately 20%, 1/5 of the global population watched this concert. And that's what really tipped the scales, where Nelson Mandela went from being seen by more or less half the population as terrorists. Now it's like almost everybody saw him as a political prisoner now, thanks to that concert and that promoter for having that vision to do that, right? And having the wherewithal and the ability to do that. So then what happens after that? So that was 88. In 1989, F.W. de Klerk becomes president of South Africa. And he begins the work to dismantle apartheid. That's his mission. And he ends up lifting the ban on the ANC, the African National Congress. There's no more ban on the ANC. And in February of 1990, so the next year, he ends up ordering the release of Nelson Mandela. So Mandela gets out of prison. So they end up partnering, Mandela and de Klerk, to dismantle apartheid. And in 1993, they're actually jointly, the two of them, are given the Nobel Peace Prize for doing this work. And in 1994, first ever free elections in South Africa. And in those free elections, Nelson Mandela, former political prisoner, is now the president of South Africa. So amazing, right? Amazing story. Then what happens? So now he's president of South Africa. And now, for this episode, enter the All Blacks, right? Because we want to talk about some rugby here. So the All Blacks. Who are the All Blacks, if you don't know? Well, they are the iconic rugby team. They are the New Zealand National Rugby Union team, their national rugby team for New Zealand. They won the first ever Rugby World Cup back in 1987. They before each match, you might have seen this before, they perform the haka. It's a Maori war dance. And the Maoris are the indigenous people of New Zealand, and they perform this, and it's supposed to be intimidating. If you go to YouTube, you can look up haka, and you see the All Blacks performing this dance. But very iconic, right? The All Blacks, the iconic rugby team in the world. So in 1995, so Mandela, right? The free elections in 94, he's elected president of South Africa. 1995, the Rugby World Cup is going to be held, or is held, in South Africa. Is the the first big sporting event of the post-apartheid era. And President Mandela sees an opportunity, right? He seizes an opportunity. At that point, in South Africa, in the culture of South Africa, the Springboks, which is the national team for South Africa, the national rugby team, is really seen as a symbol of apartheid. And rugby was seen as a white sport. Black South Africans played soccer, white South Africans, their sport was rugby. And so, but Mandela's he flipped the script on that. And because he saw the opportunity, there's going to be 1 billion people, right? Not 600 million like the concert, right? He's doubling down. There's going to be 1 billion people watching the Rugby World Cup. They're in South Africa, right? On TV. Another million are going to be watching live matches. If you count up all the live matches, 1 million people, right? People from Fiji, from Samoa, from England, from France, from Australia, New Zealand, even the US, they're all going to descend on South Africa. 1 million people to watch these matches, right? There's going to be 1 million people watching these matches. 1 billion people watching on TV, right? The final, I believe there's 60,000 people there in Johannesburg for the final. So just the world's watching, right? And I know sometimes it's hard for people in the U.S. to understand if you're, if you're not from a rugby family like myself. It's hard to understand, wow, like rugby's that popular? It is that popular. It's the second most popular sport after soccer is rugby in the world. So Mandela knows this. He sees it. He actually played a little soccer before, a little rugby before. He was really into boxing too, and I love that about Mandela because I'm really into boxing. But yeah, so he sees the opportunity, and he bets. I mean, he bets on the Springboks. He bets on the home team, which is pretty phenomenal to think about because the All Blacks, they were just crushing their opponents in this tournament. I mean, just against England, not New England, I live in New England. Against England in the semifinal, their wing, Lomu, scored 4 tries, which was like heroic against England. And they're just crushing their opponents. And but the Springboks did good, and they beat the odds, and they made it to the final against New Zealand, which was awesome, right? But how do you defeat the mighty All Blacks, right? And their wing Lomu, who is just a legend, right? And he's scoring all these tries, and they were just a scoring machine. But the Springboks found it within themselves. They shored up their defense. They kept the Lomu and the other All Blacks out of the try zone, right? And they pulled off a miracle, nothing short of a miracle, because they were the underdogs. The All Blacks were the favorite in that final, and they won. They actually won. They won in overtime on a kick, and it was amazing. And by that time, by the final, Mandela had gone out, and he'd actually gotten the whole country of South Africa, the whole nation, behind the Springboks. So not just white South Africans who were already behind the Springboks, but he got the black South Africans behind the Springboks as well. So all of South Africa is celebrating, right, in this victory. And it was really like the iconic time of that post-apartheid era, in regards to pop culture, right? Because, rugby, sport, music, pop culture. So at the end of the game, it was President Nelson Mandela, right? Black South African, first black president of South Africa, and he goes out into the field, and he's wearing a Springboks jersey, Springboks hat. Now remember again, it was just a very short time ago that the Springboks were seen as a symbol of apartheid. So here's the Mandela with the hat, the jersey, and he presents the trophy, right, to the Springboks captain, Francois Pienaar, if I pronounced that right. And it's one of the most iconic moments, scenes in sports history, and really in pop culture history globally. Just an amazing scene. So I'm going to shift now, and we're going to bring up a couple Nelson Mandela quotes. And I know I'm running short on time if I haven't already run over, but I want to make sure that we get into this Ageless, Liberated, and Limitless before I end. So one of the famous quotes of Nelson Mandela is this: like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural, it's man-made. And I love this quote because I use this. I talk about how currency, money, is man-made, right? It's just man-made, that's all it is, right? Well, the Dutch East India Company used to make their own money, right? Now, for the most part now, it's governments. I know corporations are talking about doing it again. And if you saw my episode on Mr. Robot, E-Corp, right? Evil Corporation, that's what they did, right? They had their E-coin. But nonetheless, it's man-made, right? It's not the precious currencies of time and love, right? Those are the precious currencies. So I love that Mandela quote. Mandela also said that a nation should not be judged on how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones. And I love this quote because it reminds me of the great teacher, right? The great teacher would say, said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but what you do to the least of these, you do unto me, right? So it's how you treat the impoverished, right? The oppressed. That's what it's about. That's how we should be measured, not just as individuals, but as organizations, as nations, as corporations, right? That's how we should be measured. And I'm going to say one more quote by Nelson Mandela so we can end. And it's this. It's Nelson Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. And I love this quote because I get asked often, right? Because I talk about being ageless. I talk about immortality, right? I was sent something just the other day from somebody, and people are trying to get their heads around what I'm talking about. And I love your questions because it helps me be able to articulate better, what's in here, right? Or what's in here. And people say, how's it going to be done? It seems impossible, Bethel. How are we going to usher in the fifth world? How's all this going to happen? And Nelson Mandela truly was a precursor to the fifth world because he was all about harmony. He's all about uniting people, bringing people together, right? And he did it miraculously, right? So people ask, how's it going to be done? And I love this quote because, I can say, hey, Nelson Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. So I'm going to go ahead and end there. I am very grateful for all of your support. Very appreciative for you watching this episode. I can't express that enough. Please, if you haven't already reached out for the new bracelets, reach out. It's a joy to me to be able to give. Everything that I do, I sponsor it myself. And it's me giving back. So please, if you haven't received your bracelets, receive. Hope you can come back next Sunday for Sunday Weekly Revival. Saturday for a new Saturday midday show with my co-host, Dr. Michelle Yanez. It's a lot of fun. It's unscripted. Dr. Michelle just asks me questions. There's no preparation. If you've seen the show, because sometimes my eyes will be darting back and forth and I'll be scratching my head because I have no idea what she's going to ask. And she wants it that way. She likes it. She said it's organic. It's her concept and it's fun and it's a blast and people seem to be really taking to it. So that's on Saturday. And again, Sunday, I'll be back here. So I'm here on the weekends, but I'm going to go ahead and turn this off now. I hope you have a blessed day wherever you may be or night. If it's nighttime where you're at. So blessings and hope you'll return next weekend. Bye-bye now.